let me get the show on the road, and we've got a couple of folks that will be joining us that might be late. There's seats up front. There's a small community on the Zoom link, and let's get the show on the road. So my name is Gareth Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley. We have the mission of empowering community leadership to address environmental challenges, and this fire thing is one such challenge, and what a privilege it is to be here tonight. And thanks to all of you for coming along and showing up. Here's a few things. Thanks to April and the Canmore Public Library. We've had this wonderful April back there for hosting these monthly events. These Earth Talks. Thanks also to my awesome colleague Jackie Kinney, who is the full-time environmental educator at the Biosphere Institute these days, and tonight is our full-time technical support person. So Jackie, among her other invaluable roles, will hold my hand if this all breaks down, and but we'll also relay questions from the Zoom audience during the question and answer period. I'm going to shout out to a couple of people. We've got board members here, John Paskowski. We've got a former, if you're ever a board member of the Biosphere Institute, you never really leave. So Lisa Oldring, hello, Lisa. Thanks, Lisa, and Paul McKendrick at the back. And what a privilege to have council members. We've got the mayor of Canmore who started the clappings. Thanks, Sean. and Councillor Wade Graham just walked in. So thanks to all of you for joining. If this is your first ever Earth Talk, we host these Earth Talks every month right here in these rooms on a variety of topics to help emergent, interesting environmental topics come to light. This month is a special month. We have two such Earth Talks this month on October 29th in this room. You can join Stephanie Ripley and Lance Trewartha, who are giving an important talk entitled Heat Pumps and More, Reducing Our Carbon Footprint and Greenhouse Gas Emissions through the Canmore Clean Energy Improvement Program, which is actually a granting program. You can take advantage of it to bring about clean energy in your home and reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and be more comfortable in your place. So anyway, that's on the 29th. Also upcoming, galloping towards us here, on the 20th of October in Banff, we'll have the Banff Share and Repair Fair. Join us for a day of free workshops, live music, and clothing swaps in Banff at the Fenlands Trail. We're organizing the Building for Sustainability Symposium with 170 of our closest friends, partnered up with the Bow Valley Builders and Developers Association, Sunday the 27th and Monday the 28th of October. The other event that I'll mention is our fundraiser, the Do-Si-Do fundraiser and square dance, the most fun you can have with your boots on November 15th, 2024 at the Cornerstone Cafe. By the way, if you like, that sounded interesting, but that guy spoke way too quickly. Just as we have newsletters about all this, jot your name down if you want, I'll pass this around, and you can just, if you don't understand it, just pass it on, and there's a Bear Report newsletter that you can choose to opt into in our Shift Climate Transitions newsletter as well. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're located on the ancestral and traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, Stoney Nakoda, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation tribes of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. This area is also homeland to the Métis Nation of Alberta District 4, the Rocky View. As we discuss fireguarding here tonight, we acknowledge the many Indigenous people who have had a special relationship with fire and stewardship through fire on these lands for generations. So our organization is committed to the ongoing work of learning and unlearning and reconciliation through action. Just last Monday, for example, some of you might have been there too, we were privileged to join community members from Neathny, Cochrane, and surrounding areas to take part in the Every Child Matters Truth and Reconciliation March. I want to say it's a distinct privilege for me personally to live at a time when reconciliation with First Nations, which is a really important thing these days that was not such when I was a young kid, is accompanied by reconciliation with the earth and its natural systems. And I'm proud to be affiliated with the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley as we work hard to bring about reconciliation on both of those important fronts. Now I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, and you'll be doubtless thrilled as well, because I've been talking for a little while here. So, oh my God, will he ever stop? Anyway, Ladies and gentlemen, here comes Caitlin Miller. Caitlin is the Director of Emergency Management for the Town of Canmore. Wildfire has been the top-rated hazard in Canmore, and the town has been working hard to mitigate the risk and impact of wildfire on the community. She leads the Bow Valley Community Fireguard project, which kicked off in April 2024, and construction begins this fall, as you'll see from the awesome signs at the back if you want to check that on the way during after the talk is over. Caitlin will share tonight more information about this important mitigation project and how it will benefit the community. Prior to tonight's event, our organization, the Biosphere Institute, convened some members of the environmental community who universally support the concept that Caitlin is introducing us, and also have contributed a number of questions that I shared with Caitlin a week ago as a way of helping out and helping get this right, not only from a fire guard and a human safety point of view, but from a perspective as well. And the media is here. Like, look, the Rocky Mountain Outlook just walked in, so we're all going to be famous. Make sure when you get a question, make sure it's really like an excellent question, and maybe you'll get your name in lights. This wonderful presenter of ours, and I'm so grateful to Caitlin for joining us tonight, has asked that you hold off on questions until the end of her presentation. And at that time, it will be my pleasure to help facilitate the discussion. And please join me in welcoming Caitlin Miller.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you everyone for coming. It's always a pleasure to speak at an Earth Talk and to collaborate with the Biosphere Institute. So just really excited to be here to talk about this. So I am Caitlin Miller, the Director of Emergency Management for the Town of Canmore. This is not something I ever thought that I'd grow up talking about. I thought I was going to be a teacher when I was a young kid, and moved on with a teaching degree, and then ended up as a lifeguard, oddly. And now I have a master's of public safety degree, and here I am. And I get to work with a lot of very knowledgeable and experienced people to kind of pull it all together to keep our community safe. So really excited about this project. And again, happy to answer any questions that you have at the end. If I get this going right, here we go. There you go. So historically, wildfire has been a natural and frequent occurrence in the Bow Valley. It helped maintain the health of the forest ecosystem and allowed for biodiversity. Human fire suppression efforts and changes in land use have led to the frequency of wildfires significantly decreasing. And we're now in a position of being well developed into the decadent human-made wildland forest. This significantly increases our vulnerability should a wildfire ignite. And humans are also the leading cause of wildfires, just with cigarette butts going out a window, as we saw in 2021, fires that have been left overnight, and all sorts of other little things that we do on our landscape. We also know that climate change has significantly increased the risk of wildfire occurring in the valley. So I went to elementary school here, and I never thought that I'd be giving talks about wildfire smoke or recommending to council that we needed to put in exemptions for heat pump and air conditioner noise. That just wasn't a thing. My birthday's in July, you can all write that down. And it snowed on my birthday before. So talking about how wildfire smoke has been impacting us over and over again, just with those hotter and drier conditions, it's led to the vegetation becoming much more dry and susceptible to ignition and the rapid spread of fire. It's also led to extended fire seasons. And that's due to the later onset of winter and earlier and faster spring melt. So every year, despite wildfire season officially kicking off on the 1st, this year it kicked off February 20th. In BC, they've made it year-round. Wildfires have also been increasing in frequency and intensity. So the combination of the dry conditions, the higher temperatures, and strong winds leads to more frequent and intense wildfires. And they're harder to put out. And again, the sheer amount of really lodgepole pine that we have in the valley, which is quite flammable and ready to burn, has created an unhealthy ecosystem where more fire-resistant vegetation does not have the space to grow and thrive. So we're here tonight to talk a little bit about what we can do about it. With that, we need to talk about our wildfire mitigation. So to mitigate the risk of wildfire, we need to remove, reduce, convert, and isolate the fuel amount and arrangement. So there needs to be less fuel to burn so that high intensity fires that are throwing embers into the wind are not landing in our developed areas. The town of Canmore regularly applies for funding to do vegetation management within the municipal boundary. And vegetation management by way of fuel reduction is completed in areas prioritized by our wildfire mitigation strategy. This fuel reduction is thinning, pruning, and cleaning of areas to increase spacing and is intended to help slow down the fire and not give it as much wood to burn at a higher intensity. The town of Canmore has been doing these types of projects for over a decade, and these projects are funded through the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, and they're done so at about $200,000 at a time, so there's only so much we can do each season with the funding that we get. The Community Fireguard program is a little bit different though. So it's a new program that was just established by the province. There had been previous ones in the past, so they've kind of kicked it back up again. And again, it's managed through FRIA, so that's the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta. There's no cap on the funding except for what has been given to FRIA to administer out. And this type of work is to clear vegetation from the area. So more than the thin prune clean, this is actually clearing the vegetation to reduce the fuel load in the areas. This is going to help break or slow the path of a wildfire, and these new clearing areas will need to be maintained over time. So the town of Canmore, along with the MD of Bighorn and the Kananaskis Improvement District, applied for a grant together to construct the fire guards in and around Canmore, including Harvey Heights, Deadman's Flats, and the Canmore Nordic Center. And we're doing this with support of the project, and we work really closely with our friends in Alberta Parks and Alberta Forestry. John already got a shout out today, so I'll give him another one. We're working with Stu Walkinshaw, and I always give him a shout out because it makes him feel so nice and comfortable. But Stu does a lot of our wildfire behavior stuff in town, and he is local, knows the landscape, and knows what fuel load we have here. So really great to have him on the team as well. So this is what is planned for the Fireguard project overall. Now, I've been asked a couple of times, like, how is this different than what's being planned in Banff? How is it different than what was done in Jasper ahead of time? But I can't compare our communities. Our communities are different. We have different circumstances, different ecosystems, and the way our communities are developed are different too. So what works in one community doesn't necessarily work here. So these fire guards are designed for the Bow Valley. They're designed to protect the communities that we are designing them for. And they will be in place eventually overall to help keep our community safe. So this is like the big map of it. As you can see, we have on here where the areas that we're thinning are, the areas that we have existing treatment, the areas that are going to be harvested, and the areas that we are continuing to plan for and what plans we have in place. Those are the next steps. This project has happened very quickly. So in April, we went to council, or actually in May, we went to council, but we did apply in April for the funding. And when we were applying for it, we thought that we weren't going to be able to start construction until really next year in 2025. But throughout the summer, even in June, we were talking to the province and they were asking us how ready we would be to start in the fall. And our project is a big priority for the province. It's we're a very important community, especially along the supply chain. We bring a lot of money into the region. So economically, we're very important as well. So making sure that we're keeping the community safe is really important. And the work that we've been doing over the last number of years, just with fire smarting, the advocacy work that's been done through council to the province about the veg management plan. So that's the vegetation management plan that's owned by the province. And just the ability to do this work. You can't really see from here, but it's almost all on provincial land. So being able to work with the province on this project and to move it over the finish line and to have the expediency that we have with it is really great and really important just to keep things going. So our progress to date so far, we have the planning completed, as you saw, for Stoneworks Creek, Harvey Heights, and East Park Gates. But we've also done the Canmore Nordic Center, West and East areas. We have those planned. What we applied for the construction that's going to kick off this fall is for Stoneworks Creek, Harvey Heights, and the East Park Gates. So we'll spend most of the night talking about those. We do have prescriptions set for each area, and I'll get into a little bit of that, but overall it looks like harvesting or clearing while leaving ground coverage, thinning, so the thin, prune, clean, and it's going to look more aggressive than what you've seen in more some of the fire smarted areas. So the 3-meter crown spacing, and that's the top of the tree to top of the tree. And then we'll retain Douglas fir and aspen in both harvested and thinned areas to the best of our abilities. So right now we're working through some of the permits that we need to make sure that we can start the construction work. We completed a wildlife and avian study, and we continue to work with the provincial government and municipal district of Bighorn and Kananaskis Improvement District, just on the collaboration piece to make sure we're all communicating with our communities and communicating wholly. We've also engaged with the local mill to have the work completed, and they're really good. It's regional mill, so we're excited to have this work happen quickly and then be able to use the revenues of the work to go back into the project to pay for the other things that need to happen. So our schedule looks a little bit like this. So in the fall and winter of this year, this is the work that we've just applied for, is the Stoneworks Creek, Harvey Heights, and East Park Gates. Next summer and into the fall and of 2025 and winter of 2026, that's when we'll be planning to do the Canmore Nordic Center East and West. And then August to April 2025 and 2026 is when we would complete the remainder around the rest of Canmore. So here's a map of the work that's starting this fall, just the overall big picture, a little close up. So as you can see, we'll have the larger cleared areas, and this is just, things change as we go through some of our processes. So this is a more updated map than what you'll see on the boards back there. But we have larger cleared areas that then have the thinned areas buffering them. So that's in the Stonework Creeks area. Harvey Heights has the clearing behind the areas that have already been treated. So they've done a lot of fire smart work over the past couple of years. So they'll have a clearing behind that. We'll get a little more into the details as well. And then we'll have the area by the East Park Gates. So that's just the top left of your screen there. It's a small little area, but it'll be cleared with no buffering zones around them. It's close up onto the highway as well. Now, one thing I'm often asked is that, will the clearings and resulting grass just mean that we'll have a faster moving grass fire? So while we might see fire go through there, they are tactically easier to respond to and to suppress, and they don't produce as much of a high intensity fire as those that are fueled by the old ripe forest, such as the one that surrounds us. So it is a tactic to slow the fire down. Even if the fire's still moving, it is easier to suppress as it's moving. Okay, so I add these definitions in here. I don't know if they're gonna be helpful or not, but they were helpful for me. Again, education, public safety background, not a forestry background. So when we go through the prescriptions, we're talking about diameter at breast height. That's measured from 1.3 meters from ground level. That's important because you can have tall people, short people who just want to make sure that's consistent. The stump diameter is measured at 30 centimeters from the ground level. And then this is the one that tripped me up the other day, OS or overstory or advanced growth understory or AGUS. That's just anything that's greater than 15 centimeters stump diameter and 3-meter height. And then regeneration is going to be anything under 15 centimeter stump diameter. That word is just tripping me up tonight. All right. So when we're building a fire guard, I'm going to get a little bit into the prescriptions here. So this is what we're doing in Stoneworks Creek, and it'll be just over a 2-kilometer wide landscape level fuel break. It'll consist of a 1.1 kilometer wide mechanical fuel removal with residual cluster retention on the west side of Stoneworks Creek, and then 850 meter wide mechanical thin prune clean. And that might have changed a little bit just with the prescriptions changing a little bit. But you can see when we're starting that. So this fall, winter, We'll be starting with our mechanical cluster harvest and then mechanical or hand thin prune clean, depending on what the landscape looks like there. The debris disposal method will be to pile and burn. And in that harvest, what the mechanical harvest actually looks like is that we're retaining all 5 needle pines, so that's white bark and limber pine. We're going to retain that Douglas fir overstory, the green deciduous stems and shrubs, unless they're damaged or unhealthy. We're going to remove green coniferous, and that's the like overstory and advanced growth understory stems. And then we'll go on to, oh, I just lost my spot, sorry. To retaining residual clusters of approximately 50 meters in diameter with about minimum of 200 meters intercluster spacing. So that's a lot of like technical for like forestry terms to say that we'll have small clusters in the area of the trees that we want to retain. We've often been asked, and I'm not sure if you can really see, but there's some white dotted lines, if we'll be buffering the trails. No, we'll not be buffering the trails. And we've had this conversation with a couple of different groups already. When you buffer trails, what we've seen in other areas is that there's pretty significant blowdown. So it's harder to keep the trail afterwards. There's a lot of maintenance that's required afterwards. It's better to just clear and make the trail again and reclaim the trail than it is to try to have a buffer around it. Also, this is a public safety project, so we don't want any little fire pathways or snakes to go through. So really important there. It will be a cleared area. When we say that we're clearing it, it will look a lot like a logging project, and it will look and feel a lot like that as it's happening. It's going to be a pretty significant landscape change. And I say this because it's really important for all of us to understand that it's necessary to keep our community safe. So I don't want to shock anybody when it starts happening, but we will have heavy machinery out there. And the landscape is pretty challenging as well. So we're going to have to build some roads in there to be able to haul everything in and out. And then we're going to work with the contractor to make sure that everything is reclaimed afterwards. There will be stumps that are left over, and I'll show another picture later on, and that's just part of what it's going to look like for a little bit, and it's okay. It'll be good. We're also going to thin some of the area, and when we're going to remove all the dead standing trees, so a lot like what we do with our Fire Smart vegetation management, and we'll do that unless they're showing signs of cavity nesting activity. So again, I mentioned that we had done an avian and wildlife study ahead of time, so we know where those are. And then anything that might present itself as one afterwards, we'll make sure that we're tagging those and having the conversation on site. We're also going to look at any logs that are in an advanced state of decay and not contributing to wildfire fuel load. They might be left for ecological purposes as well. So I think those are some really important points just as to how careful these prescriptions have been, and the work that we've been doing with Alberta Parks to make sure that the right prescriptions are in place and making sure that we have the right people doing it so that that work is done. They're very experienced in it. And again, all debris that's resulting from operations will be piled in clean and tight bundles for future burning. And we're looking at having burning done with the air curtains again to minimize the amount of smoke that's in the landscape. So going on to Harvey Heights, so it's pretty similar in what the prescription looks like. In this case, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of Fire Smart work that's been done around the area. And it'll be 150 meters to really like 100 to around 150 meter wide fuel removal on the outside edge of Harvey Heights around it. And then we'll be going in with hand crews to thin, prune, and clean that fuel reduction again in the sensitive areas. So we know that there's a number of sensitive areas in Harvey Heights, and we've kind of worked around a few of those there. And lastly, at the East Park gates, so this will be about a 1.1 kilometer long fuel removal, and it's on the east boundary of the national park. What's challenging about this area is it ends right up on the rail line there. And then it's a really swampy area next to it because the river flows and changes over time in that area. So really wet, dense wood. And we wouldn't be able to get there with any machinery. So we're looking at different options for completing that fire break there. Okay, so we're going to go on to some of the co-benefits of FireGuard. So we know that it is a big tool in wildfire mitigation, but there's also a lot of benefit to the ecosystem. So the Mountain Legacy Project has a wealth of pictures to show what the Bow Valley looked like years ago. So I pulled this one of Lady McDonald and Grotto, and it's taken from the Georgetown area. And you can see that there's hardly any trees on the mountainside, very different look than what we see here today. This photo is from 1890. We'll contrast that with this one from 2013. So we now have a densely populated forest that extends up the mountainsides and across the valley. And frankly, it's overdue and ready to burn. We also have development throughout there where we didn't see that in the other picture, just going back here. So a lot of development and a lot more trees. And when we walk in the forest, this is just a side-by-side. On the left, you can see the trees in the large area that were overgrown. They don't look healthy. They don't provide a lot of space for wildlife to walk through. And on the right is after a fire smart fuel reduction treatment. So you can see that there's more space through the trees. It's easier to walk through. And there's nothing on the ground either to help burn up into the fuel load. Now, just imagine being a large animal, like a person. Which area would you like to walk through? Which one's more inviting to walk through? Which can you actually walk through, right? So when we're talking about some of the co-benefits to wildlife, these are some of the things that we're looking for in the thinned areas and in the more wide open spaces. Again, much of our forest is quite hard to get through. So this FireGuard project will not replace the benefits that wildfire has on an ecosystem with the burning and regeneration, but it will mimic some of them by opening up more of the landscape and improve the habitat for a number of species, especially deer, elk, and bears. And by harvesting and thinning, the FireGuard will open the forest canopy and improve conditions by increasing foraging abilities within that habitat as well. Now, we talk a lot about wildlife corridors, and those are spatially delineated areas around Canmore that are intended to provide areas for wildlife movement and some wildlife habitat. And in some of these cases, some of the FireGuard work is overlapping with some of the wildlife corridors. In most cases, the wildlife corridors are not the best available habitat, but are what remained after our developed boundaries were drawn. So the fire break will respect these boundaries and improve the wildlife habitat and productivity by opening up the forest canopy. The design of our fire guards also includes some retention patches, which on a limited basis will provide cover for wildlife. So that was one thing I first heard when we started talking about this project was, well, I know of another fire guard that was built and the caribou all got eaten by wolves because they had nowhere to go. Well, they need like space to move, they need the edge habitat. There's like, I'm not a biologist, but we can't just run through a forest that's going to trip up ankles. Like big mammals like moose, elk, deer, they all have the same problem we do. Roots and logs do trip them up as well and don't let them go as fast. Some Douglas fir and all aspen and cavity nesting trees will be retained. So we kind of talked a little bit about that already. But that's just really important as we go through. So that's where you'll see some of those retention patches remaining in some of the areas being cleared. This was like, I frankly stole these from John, just throwing that out there. Thank you, John. He did a presentation for our Fire Smart forum back in June, and he had a couple of these really great pictures in there. Like, so when we're talking about what the stumps and the clearing will look like, this is like the best equivalent I could get. I tried really hard to work with a GIS specialist to show what the clearing would look like at Stoneworks Creek. but it just didn't come out that stark of a difference. And I think part of it is because of the benches that we have up on Lady McDonald and into Stoneworks Creek, because it's kind of camouflages some of it when you put it into the computer system. So this is what a little bit is going to look like, but more bigger clearings, as I mentioned before, over 1 kilometer wide. So there will be lots of space for more foliage to grow, and they will require maintenance over time. The best example I could find, again stolen from John, is the picture of the recent habitat improvement project that happened up in the Spray. And this work was done to improve habitat for large animals and has been quite successful. I even heard that maybe they got an award recently in honor of this project. But opening up the landscape and making landscape level changes to the fuel sources will help not only protect our community from wildfire, but also help the ecosystem grow in a more biodiverse way. So it won't just be lodgepole pines, we'll have more space for berries, more space for other trees, and more space for vegetation that is much more fire resistant. So how can the community be prepared? There's a couple of different things that we can all do as well. And I'll just get into this by starting with Fire Smart home assessments. If you haven't had a Fire Smart home assessment done yet, you can book one with the Canmore Fire. They are free. I know the MD of Bighorn also is doing Fire Smart home assessments if you live in the MD. These Fire Smart home assessments are a great way for you to have some actions that you can take on your property to protect your home. What we see when we have a wildfire isn't just the wall of flames coming towards us, and we'll do our best to slow and stop the fire from getting into the developed areas. But we can't do much. Like, I can't throw up a giant ember net and catch all the embers that might be going with the wind. So what is really helpful is if people on their properties are taking the time to do a Fire Smart home assessment, looking at what they can change and going through the list as to like what is the easiest thing you can do and kind of building out from there. If you're replacing a roof anytime soon, please make sure that it's fire resistant roofing. If you're replacing siding, staying away from vinyl siding, these are all little things that we can do to keep our property safer. And if our properties are safer, then they're not catching, we don't want any structure fires because that takes up a lot of resources as well. And we don't want to lose homes, and we want to be able to recover quickly. Some little things that I've done recently is I changed the landscaping on the front of my house. That one costs a little bit more. Put in a fire resistant tree, put a lot of rock, made sure that there was no vegetation touching the side of my house. I've also put up gutter guards on all of my gutters, so that if there are embers coming over, they're metal gutter guards recommended by Fire Smart. And those are just two of the small things that I've done in the past year. I've also taken down a tree a year basically in my backyard because I had a lot. I live in an older established neighborhood. Those trees have been there for a really long time and they're becoming unhealthy. There's a lot of them. And if I can start taking some down, my neighbors can start taking some down as well, it will make us all more resilient. And that's the other thing, talking to your neighbors, asking if they've had a Fire Smart home assessment. Maybe they don't know that they're free. Maybe they don't know that they can book them online really easily, just with a couple of clicks of the button at canmore.ca/firesmart. But getting out there and making sure that folks have the ability to understand what's making them vulnerable, I think is really important. And sharing your experiences if you've had a home assessment is also something that it can motivate your neighbor to maybe take that extra step. We're also working on having 2 of our staff trained as neighborhood recognition specialists so that we'll be able to support some of the neighborhood recognition programs. And neighborhood recognition programs are when communities and groups within a community get together. So I know up in Peaks of Grassy, there's a few folks talking already about how they can help put forward some Fire Smart initiatives at the community level by doing like neighborhood cleanups and stuff like that. We're going to have some staff that are trained to be able to help support those neighborhood recognition groups. So The last thing you can do is keep supporting vegetation management projects. And I tried to keep it a little shorter today so that there'd be lots of time for questions, because I would imagine that we have some questions about this today. So that's the end of my formal presentation, but I'd like to invite Gareth back up here to help facilitate any questions you all may have.
Somebody at the back, turn on the lights, please, if you have that. Thanks very much. Thanks so much. And I just want to just kick this off by saying, look, I personally, I'm very much in support of things of being proactive, not strictly reactive. And there's been so much that wildfire calls upon us to be reactive and just make sure you know how to get out of town and so on and so forth. If the big fire comes, and it's just so wonderful to be part of a community, a Bow Valley community with the MD and the BAM, where we're doing this proactive thing. And that doesn't happen by itself. And I just want to, I see Sally Cottle at the back there. Hi, Sally. As a longtime resident here since 1989, I've always, this administration is next level. They're spectacular. The leadership that we have from administration and council is unparalleled. I think it's exemplary, and we wouldn't be hearing this. We wouldn't be having these rays of hope without that team. So I'm really grateful to Caitlin for bringing us this talk tonight. Another big hand. So happy to address questions. Please keep your questions short and to the point. Questions, not speeches. Let's get lots of questions from the gang. And Caitlin reserves the right to defer questions to her colleagues if needs be. Yes, sir. And just give us your name too. What the heck?
Yeah, Phil Wilson. I live right downtown. But could you please put up the map of the stonework? Because I was intrigued that there's a sliver of land, between the highway and the southwest boundary, I guess, of the clearing that you're leaving. And I'm trying to remember what that looks like out there, but there's no houses or anything else on the other.
Let's see if I can. Oh, it's easier to see on this one here.
It's interesting that you just haven't let the highway become the barrier, and clear it right down to the highway.
I can speak to that. It's extremely steep. It is a pitch of probably about 65 to 70%. So really hard to treat.
So when Stu brings up these maps and we put the layers on for what the elevation looks like, in some places it's just white straight down because it is pretty steep, like going off those benches is.
That was a great example of a concise and thoughtful question. Thanks, Phil. Who's next? Yes, sir with the glasses.
The question is, how effective are these locations that you selected?
Yeah.
Do you have like a risk assessment? Or?
Yes. That's a great question. So the question was, why these locations essentially, and why them first? So we prioritized these locations because they are on the south facing slopes. We know that typical wildfire behavior would see a fire come down the valley from the west to the east. So we picked the most likely scenario first. We understand that fire can happen anywhere and a wildfire can ignite anywhere. But based off the existing treatments that exist elsewhere, the most likely scenario for a wildfire, we prioritize this work first. The other work is still coming, and we'll continue to apply for these FRIA grants as long as they're able, and try to control the province and get council back on advocating if the well dries up. But that's why we started with these ones.
What's your sense of how effective are they when you model other areas?
Yeah, I think the effectiveness, it's hard to say unless you have the fire right in front of you. This is the most likely scenario and the most likely to be able to stop or slow the wildfire coming from that direction.
Thanks, Dave. Ariel.
With Caitlin's prior permission, I have a question. Part-based question, and with your permission, I'm going to preamble with a very brief poem that was read in this room 10 days ago by Valentina Fox. It's written by her late son, Trent Fox. So in respect of our Indigenous relatives and all our relations, The poem is called This Land, and forgive me if I cry. This land is now tired. It is saying you no longer respect me. It becomes very hot. It also becomes very cold. There are tornadoes occurring. The land is now angry. There are earthquakes. There are fires. And the water levels are changing. We have forgotten respect. The animals, the birds, the bees are disappearing. The land is saying, I am not well. Will we listen or not? Will we learn from this or not? The land is saying, take pity on me. So my question, and you've answered it a fair bit, Caitlin, I'm so grateful yet again for your heart in leading this, is it's equally important how we do what we do as what we do. And particularly in the harvest areas with the mechanical harvest, to be truly respectful of the land and all the creatures that inhabit it. So the question is, how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we be respectful? How do we?
You know, Gareth and I had a really good conversation earlier today as well, just about how we could have more community engagement in this project. And there was a suggestion of like advisory groups, and I was like, that's all a really great idea, but with how quickly we need to get this project going, how vulnerable we are, we've kind of forged ahead with the collaboration between the different municipalities, the province as well. We were talking about how there might be space for what an advisory group could look like for the future for Fire Smart committee groups. But with just how fast moving this project has been and the timelines that have come up, it's been harder to kind of open up that engagement in more of an advisory type of way. We have been doing Indigenous consultation over the past month as well to make sure that the learnings that they have on the land are also heard. And yeah, we'll continue that as we move forward.
I want to just add, and if I can, and you're gonna get a hug right now.
No.
Look at you. There's your heart right there. And so, well, a couple of things. One is that this is being driven by climate change, and it's worth noting that the Biosphere Institute gets that, and we have programs about climate. So we've just check it. I won't go into it. This is not the night for it, but we'll say that it's the Shift newsletter. You can kind of pursue that and just find out about things you can do to do your bit to complement the work of the Town of Canmore and their climate emergency action plan to try and bring down the heat, literally and metaphorically, and try and get at the root cause of this. So that we can do, as well as the other details that Caitlin has encouraged us to. Yes, sir.
Great projects. Reach for the valley. They just spoke at Rotary a few months ago, and I'm glad it's moved forward very fast. Different angle with new technology. Is the valley set up for rapid detection fires, such as satellite detection? And are we set up for rapid response to fires in the valley?
So I was forgetting to repeat the question. Are we set up for rapid detection and rapid response to wildfire in the valley is the question, right?
Yeah, so with a lot of the fuel in the valley being on provincial land, we work very closely with Alberta Forestry and their wildfire response team. They actually came out to council in May and did a joint presentation with me to talk about the ways that we collaborate. So we have a mutual aid agreement with them, and we rely heavily on them and their detection system. And I know that they, when a storm rolls through, they're rolling through behind it with their air patrols for that detection. They catch fires very quickly. And the fire that was in the MD of Bighorn, that one was caught very quickly. Like they were pretty much on top of it when the fire ignited. The fire that we had out here not too long ago, just near Mount Engadine, it was also caught very quickly. And then our friends to the west of us in the Banff National Park, they have a very similar detection system and they work very quickly. So there had been a small fire in Carrot Creek that was put out within hours because of how early it was detected. We also have a lot of users in this area, so oftentimes fires are reported very quickly. So very important to just make sure that if you see smoke, you report it to either 310 fire or 911. Both get dispatched either to Canmore Fire or to wildfire, and allow for an easy response as well. We've talked to a couple of different companies over the summer as well about detection systems, but just where we're at and the provincial land around us, we refer them back to the province and say that we're happy to explore it if the province is interested in exploring. And we also share with our partners in the MD of Bighorn for some of their MD land.
There's over 50 people in this room, and good on you, I say. There's just under half that on the Zoom audience, and we have a question from one of our folks who's listening virtually. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions from the chat, but I'll just start with the first one. So after the initial clearing / harvesting work is completed, has any thought been given to having volunteers take on some of the ongoing maintenance work?
And just repeat it.
So has any thought been given to having volunteers take on some of that ongoing maintenance work? The ongoing maintenance work is still something that we're looking into and researching, so I'm not going to say completely off the table, but there's different ways that we already, or the province already maintains some of those areas with some of the work that they do with CAMBA and the Kananaskis, Friends of Kananaskis as well. So there may be opportunity there. It's something that we would have to explore further.
Thanks. We'll do another one from the room and then invite you, Jackie, if you want, please.
That's okay. Just a
what's your name?
quick question, I'm Courtney.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi. So what are we doing with the cleared wood? I'm just curious on that, where that's going, or if it's getting repurposed, or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll repeat the question for you, no problem. So what are we doing with the cleared wood? So there is some merchantable timber, so timber that we can sell. And we're going to take the revenues from that and put it back into the project to keep the cost of the project down. That means that we can do more work, that there's more funds available across the province, because this is the Free Community Fireguard project is an oversubscribed project. It's so there's a lot of communities that are looking to build. So anything that we can do to kind of share the money and reuse some of that money to help continue on is something that we're going to be looking at. And then anything that we can't use, we will be piling and burning.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just to clarify that we're leaving like those patches of the Douglas fir and aspen.
Yeah.
Assuming because they're fire resistant trees, is it just because we want those to populate over time in the areas, or like, and I guess like a follow-up question to that is, can we plant fire resistant trees in the cleared areas?
Yeah.
So then I'll take a stab at this is mainly for the Zoom audience, we're repeating, but anyway, what's the rationale for leaving the Douglas fir and the trembling aspen? And has there been any thought given to replanting those fire resistant trees?
Yeah, so I'm gonna phone a friend and have John talk about why we're keeping some of those trees and not others, but I will answer the replanting question. So we're not going to be planting in those areas because it is still a fire guard. So we want to make sure that it is clear. We are doing the retention where we can, but the purpose isn't to repopulate it just with fir and aspen. We still want it to be able to slow and stop the fire. But
I think you got it, but we will try and encourage aspen growth because it is fire resistant. And when you open up the canopy and maybe even cut a few of those aspen down, you'll get more suckering and they'll have a chance to sort of form. We're not going to do a full stand conversion or go out there trying to plant aspen per se at this point, but that's something that's being considered.
Hey, John, just if I may, speak as an ecologist, what's the benefit of having this mixed patchiness? Is that a good thing for nature compared to what's currently there?
Yeah, wildlife typically like a sort of a mixed up different patches, edges and things like that. A continuous lodgepole pine forest like we have right now doesn't really produce a lot of good food. So this will sort of break things out for a lot of the bigger animals and some of the smaller ones too.
Let's go with Paul McKendrick at the back and then Jackie.
Sorry, Chad's just having trouble hearing John's response. Would you mind just summarizing it?
God help me, I have to summarize John Paskowski's response. So basically, the first part was like saying yes to what Caitlin said. And the second part was talking about the patchy habitat, the mixed, that's much better for many large mammals compared to what you got right now, which is I'm gonna extemporize here, but I have heard somebody whose initials may well be John Paskowski referred to what's out there as the green desert. Is that fair? From an ecological point of view, I personally would much rather have the patchiness that we're headed towards. And thanks for that, Jackie. Paul.
Have you thought about, well, I realize you're moving quickly here, so it's like a challenge, but have you thought about doing anything to mitigate CO2 emissions and from the burn piles? And specifically, I'm thinking about biochar. Biochar is basically combusting biomass without oxygen, effectively creating charcoal. And so the CO2 is stored in that, and when you leave it in the ground, it actually helps things grow. It helps produce to remove crops, or in this case, crops needed in the forest. And there's biochar units being manufactured in Alberta now, and you can sell the credits. Voluntary money for and so I don't want to go too deep into this. I'd be happy to talk to you about it offline, but just wanted to see if anything like that.
So the question, thanks, Paul. The question was, has there been thought given within the scope of this project about the notion of mitigating the carbon that would be otherwise released by all the combustion of all of the slash piles? And specifically, what about biochar, given the fact that it is a proven technology in Alberta and that it's a way of sequestering carbon, and in fact, you can sell it for carbon credits, among other benefits. There? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so for this question, thank you for providing it in advance. I called a couple of friends. And first with the GHG emissions, that one was a harder one to calculate just based off of kind of where we're at and how much the trees give off. And it was a long answer that didn't have a very good answer at the end of it. I also called another friend who said it's a little more complex than that, and just with the speed of the project as to how quickly we need to get this going. It's certainly something that we can look into and research more, and happy to have the conversation offline and talk a little bit more about it. One of the things we're trying to do is when we're doing our burning is just using those air curtains again. Stu and I were just talking this morning about different ideas that we could use out there, but for this first part of the project, it will be the pile and burn, and then we can look at other things and other research as we move forward with the rest of the project.
And it's let me ask it, and it's not inconceivable that somebody, and maybe the Biosphere Institute or maybe others could, there's some really important questions that some of which have been asked, and that we don't fully have the answers to, that would constitute a possible research agenda for those who want to help communities out and do some original research at the same time. And we'll keep our eye on that as a community, and maybe biochar is on that list because Paul's on my board, so goodness knows, you may not let it go, and you're absolutely, that would be a really fun thing to look at. So anyway, just like, pardon me for the marginalia there. Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Colleen, and I've heard this term used twice this evening. Air curtain. I have no idea what you're talking about.
All right, so the question is, what's an air curtain? And I'm just gonna go right to my friend in the back, Stu, and then I'll repeat your answer, Stu, unless you want to come. There we go. He's gonna come up.
Yeah, that's great.
So an air curtain burner is a big bin. It's like a sea can that has forced air that is blown into it, which then makes the wood combust much faster and smokeless, smoke-free, or much reduced smoke out of it. So yeah, that's what an air curtain burner is. Sorry, who was I answering?
Thank you.
There we go. Yeah.
Hey, stick around. I'll just step
to the back.
Joey.
Quite a few of us in the room here attended the Cliff White presentation last fall where he was talking about circular distances of effectiveness and then reducing. And he was talking 10 to 20 kilometers as the starting point around every community. And then progressive action as you got to the center. I see hundreds of meters, not dozens of kilometers here. Are we progressing towards Cliff's plan?
So I'll take a crack at the, thanks for the easy question. So, the question, Cliff White gave a great presentation, which is actually, recorded and it's on our YouTube channel, that, he talked about community forests and their applicability for this sort of thing. And that's not the direction that we're all going, but Cliff talked about this notion of kind of efficacy, I suppose, within, a certain radius of a community and, the fact that it can be, what did you say, a dozen kilometers?
Between 10 and 20 kilometers is the starting point when you start looking inwards.
Right, and so, and you're asking if eventually we're gonna be working at that scale, even though we're starting at a more, even though it's a large scale compared to what we have, 2.2 kilometers, for example, is the width of one of the wider fire guards. Are we going to approach that with that big number you just said? That's the question.
Yeah, I think that's a valid question. I think one of the important things here is looking at the project as a whole and how it complements other work that's being done. So if we look at what is being done in Banff National Park, and we frequently talk to them about what their plans are and how that complements our plans, we were going to work within our sphere of control, and then we know that Banff is looking at has applied for Fireguard funding. We know that Banff National Park continues to look at their wildfire mitigation strategies and what they have planned. Mountain pine beetle is another thing that we all continue to work on, and mitigating the effects of mountain pine beetle. We know that Kananaskis Improvement District is applying for other fire guards. They just went to council recently as well. So I think we're looking at a small piece of the puzzle right now and how it fits into the big picture and how all these different projects complement each other and how important that collaboration and communication is between the different levels of government. So whether it be the municipality, the province, or Parks Canada and what they're doing, it all has to fit together to keep everybody in the valley safe.
And that was a hell of an answer, Bill.
Bill, just to point out too, that if you zoom out on that map, you'd see that everything from the park boundary to Carrot Creek has been logged already.
Yeah.
And if you zoom to out a little further than that, you'd see that everything from Carrot Creek to Johnson Lake has been burned in 2003. So that large scale work has largely been done. If anyone's keeping the far to the Nordic Center, you'll see that the province then reciprocated, even though it's on the north facing slopes.
And just make a big voice for the speaker.
Yeah, to put a big fuel break in there. And the area in Carrot Creek in the Valley Bottom was burnt in 2007 or something. So a lot of that work at that scale, at least on the upwind side, has been done. I think we're more vulnerable perhaps to the south and the east.
And to paraphrase, and within Banff National Park, between here and the town of Banff, there's been extensive fire guarding, for lack of a better word, that's previously done within Carrot Creek, for example. Fair? Paraphrase?
Yeah, I mean, there's a massive fuel break. Everything's logged between the east boundary of Banff and Carrot Creek.
Thank you.
So, it's at a scale that exceeds all of this.
Time for a few more questions if anyone has one. Yes, sir.
Just on that subject, I've always wondered, that fire, what I believe it was a wildfire, was it not? In the Carrot Creek area, or was that a control burn?
Yeah, it was a prescribed burn.
This burn?
Yeah.
The regrowth, the regeneration in that area always mystifies me. It doesn't seem to be much coming up. You think that same scenario would apply to what we're doing here?
You want to take that? You're talking about the Banff National Park, the Carrot Creek area, is that right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, on the north side of the Trans-Canada, you drive along, like there's hardly anything coming back, so.
And Bill Hunt has had a leadership role, now retired, had a leadership role within Banff National Park on projects like that.
Retired.
You live retired.
It's not as.
So he's not speaking on behalf of the minister right now, but go ahead.
You'll see two very different things. So the logged area, like I say, if you walk through that, it still looks very much like a clear cut, like, in most of it. There's
Just turn around, Bill, so that.
There's some patches left. And then if you wander further into the park and get from Fair Creek to between there and Johnson's Lake, you'll see a bit of a mixture, but actually some of that area would really benefit from deeper. Because what you'll get is after the first burn, pine trees that are there, the cones go to seed, and they come up with smaller pine trees. And if you can get those reburnt before they start producing cones, then you can actually get that shift happening. They'll just regenerate that pine forest. If you drive into Kootenai Park and have a look where the big Kootenai complex fire occurred in 2003, you'll just see a sea of these tiny little pine trees. Yeah, and they're just in their thickest stage.
Yeah.
And if you don't burn those out before they start producing cones, then you've got a real launch. And Stu can speak better than I can about volatility and stuff, but it's a much finer fuel, so it's pretty first.
And so for those that are listening online, Bill Hunt was talking about the importance of making sure that you're going back and maintaining the prescribed birds or clear cut areas, to summarize.
Okay, let's go with Jackie. Question from the Zoom people.
How will human use be managed in the cleared areas? I can imagine the aesthetic value of those areas increasing because of better views, and this could have negative impacts on wildlife. So the example that they provided was logging roads. How can we prevent people from using them? If there's a good view at the end of the logging road, then people would use it regardless.
Yeah.
And I'll do the paraphrase trick, and thank you. That's in essence, we're creating fire guards that humans love, wide open meadowy areas, these patchy habitats, like it's the savannas of Africa, right? It's where we tend to love that stuff. How are we going to manage human use? So, I imagine that the questioner is concerned about wildlife use of those areas, and will there be like people with dogs and mountain bikers everywhere, and kind of reducing the efficacy of the habitat enhancement that we've just done because there's so many people on the landscape. I think that's probably a good paraphrase of the question, and I'll turn it over to Caitlin / John.
Yeah, I'll just answer that the timing of this project has the opportunity to really support the Canmore Area Trail Strategy project that is also ongoing, to look at the trails that we have and what are we going to continue to maintain, and working with those different groups that have special interests in those trails, to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what trails will be rebuilt after this is done and how we can help support that all together. So I'm not sure if John has anything to add, but I got a thumbs up, so.
And a thumbs up from John Paskowski, a difficult thing to get, so let's just take advantage and move on. One more question? Okay, and your last one is a humdinger, so let's hear from Jackie. Yeah, okay, just like, we'll do two more. Yes, sir, go ahead. Big voice and your name?
Dave Chaplin, live down Three Sisters. We talked a lot about killing trees and clear cutting and that kind of stuff. We haven't talked about the burgeoning population, people. What's being done to control the main source of a lot of fires? In terms of just so more and more people coming in. And party town and everything else going on. What's addressing that side of the equation? Cut down the other sides. The fuel is fascinating. It's very important.
So,
people are the ones.
Pretty straightforward question for Caitlin. Having to do with, the question basically is, what about the other side of the equation, which is fair, the burgeoning human population, and the fact that there's so many people that love these mountains and the population keeps on going up. What's Caitlin doing about that?
I am working very closely with the province. But all jokes aside, like the town of Canmore really supports like sustainable tourism and what that looks like. And we see the importance to our area. We also see the importance of sustainable development and are really happy with the symposium that is being put on by the Biosphere Institute about building sustainably. There's so many things that we can do. So there's so many, and there's a lot of opportunity to educate and to help create more sustainable development and more sustainable tourism. And I think we have the right people at the table for both of those things.
Okay, last question goes to, thanks, Caitlin.
Yeah,
She hasn't been flummoxed yet. You're amazing.
that's a close one.
You're really good at answering these questions. A last question from Jackie and the Zoom people.
Okay, I'm gonna combine two questions.
A nice big voice so that I don't have to repeat.
Yes. So in general, are there gonna be benefits for the neighborhood coming out of this project? So number one, will any firewood be made available for residents for heating, fueling purposes, and that could displace fossil fuel emissions in our community? And then also, will there be benefits provided like funding for fire guards or rooftop sprinklers for the neighborhoods?
Yeah, those are two really good questions. As for the firewood that's left over, I think because we're hauling and logging that merchantable timber, I don't know how much will be left over in those regards.
Fair statement.
Yeah.
I would suggest that the availability of firewood
Yeah.
will be minimal to none.
But now in terms of other projects that we could do with Fire Smart, we have identified in our climate emergency action plan to investigate what subsidies or incentives might look like to do some of those Fire Smart actions to your home, such as roof replacements, tree removals or replacements, siding and screen replacements. So we continue to investigate those. There's a couple of opportunities with some grants that we know are available. So we're always looking at different ways we can do things. And I would just say, stay tuned for 2025.
Good, another good answer. So listen, I'm going to call it if that's okay. I want to suggest that the conversation, this is really important, the conversation shouldn't end, won't end. With this, there's when we say break, there's people like, a big thanks to Stu and John, and we'll get to you in a sec. We've got good community resources. You know that there's a mayor and a councillor in the room. You know there's give a great quote to Greg Colden at the back, and like get your name in lights. Keep talking of it. I'm really impressed by